There's a very dangerous theology being taught these days. It's really a recycled old one called replacement theology.
You give me that.
In return, I'll give you whatever you want.
And one of the greatest offenders against this is Jack Hibbs. In a recent video, he really unpacked the dangers and the heresy of replacement theology. And by doing so, did all of us a favor. And this is hugely important. So I wanted to do my own video really exposing the dangers of something usually you find in Reformed theology called replacement theology. Why it's a cop-out, a lack of faith, and ultimately harmful to the cause of Christ. So let's go. Hibbs says that replacement theology is a false doctrine and a heresy. That may seem extreme, but I'll tell you why I think he's right. See, God has unbroken covenantal promises that he's given to Israel, national, ethnic Israel, and they cannot be nullified by the church. For example, he points to Jeremiah 31:31-33, where it says, God says, I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. I will be their God and they shall be my people. Jack Hibbs argues that if Israel did not have a future as a nation in God's plan, then prophecy and Christ's return to Jerusalem, etc., that would all be meaningless. So he urges Christians not to adopt the logic of Israel doesn't matter anymore because it's illogical. He says the church has not replaced Israel, and he's right. Number two, what replacement theology claims. In short, replacement theology asserts that the covenant promises to Israel in the Old Testament find their full realization in the church, believing Jews plus Gentiles, and that national ethnic Israel has no special separate future in God's purposes as a people. They say the church is now the true Israel or new Israel.
You've been replaced.
And the land promises, ethnic promises, all of that are either fulfilled spiritually or have passed away.
It's an allegory about spiritual survival in the contemporary world.
Number three, why replacement theology is biblically flawed, to put it mild. Here are several lines of argument, each supported with scripture. A, God's unconditional covenant with Abraham and his seed. In Abraham, God said in Genesis 17:7, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. Some key words I want you to zoom in on there are offspring and seed. Hebrew, that's zera. In Genesis 17:8, and I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. He's talking about physical descendants, real land, and a real nation. And these promises are unconditional. God swore by himself. Genesis 22:16-18. And they involve seed and land. If replacement theology says these promises are entirely passed on to the church, and the ethnic national seed of Abraham is no longer in view, then it must now deal with how God keeps an everlasting land seed covenant. Either the promises fail, or they're being fulfilled in the church in some way, but that invites serious reinterpretation of the seed concept and the land promises. B, Paul's distinction between Israel and the church. In Romans 9:4-5, Paul writes about Israel. They are Israelites, the offspring, seed of Abraham, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the worship, the promises. To them belong the patriarchs, and from them, according to the flesh, comes the Christ. Notice, their offspring, their covenants. All that points to Israel. In Romans 11:1-2, Paul asks, has God rejected his people? And then he answers, by no means. I myself, Paul says, am an Israelite, a descendant, seed of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. Then in Romans 11:25-29, Paul describes how a hardening has come upon the hearts of Israelis, but just in part, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And then he says all Israel will be saved. Verse 29, for the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. So these texts show that Paul recognizes a continuing role for ethnic Israel and does not treat Israel and the church as completely identical in the program. Replacement theology often collapses the two, but Paul doesn't. Letter C, prophetic and eschatological promises tied to Israel. Jeremiah 31:31-34 says, a new covenant I will make with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. So Israel and Judah are still in view in the prophecy of the new covenant. Ezekiel 36, God said, I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the lands and bring you into your own land. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you. You shall be my people, and I will be your God. This can only refer to a land return promise tied to Israel. Zechariah 12:9 through 14. These texts speak of Israel, Jerusalem, the nations coming against Jerusalem, the Lord's return there, etc. If replacement theology claims the church replaces Israel, then these texts either must be spiritualized or the fulfillment delayed, or changed, or both. But the normal reading ties them to Israel. Next, Matthew 23:37 to 39. Jesus says to Jerusalem, your house is left to you desolate. You will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Well, this suggests Jesus' return and recognition involves Israel and Jerusalem. Even in the New Testament, Revelation 21 and 22, the New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven, etc. Even here, the language retains a Jerusalem motif tied to God's people. Letter D. Distinctions between church and Israel in Revelation. In Revelation 2 and 3, the letters to the churches refer to the church, but in Revelation 7, 4 through 8, the 144,000 are described as selected from the 12 tribes of, wait for it, Israel. This suggests a specific Israel future in end times that is distinct from the church as such. In Revelation 11, 1 through 2, the two witnesses are in Jerusalem. The beast from the abyss ascends out of the bottomless pit at Jerusalem. The conflict is centered in Jerusalem. If replacement theology says Israel's national role is over, then these passages pose difficulty at best. Letter E, the logic of God's fidelity and the remnant. Romans 11:26 to 27 says this, and in this way all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, and he will banish ungodliness from Jacob. And this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Romans 11:28 through 29 again. As regards the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but as regards election, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. This language implies that God's covenant with the fathers, Israel's patriarchs, remains. The calling remains, and that Israel is not replaced or discarded arbitrarily. Okay, that was a lot. Let's move on to number 4, addressing the replacement theology claims. Here are how some of the claims of replacement theology can be answered. Claim number 1. The church is the true Israel, and all promises to Israel now refer to the church. Well, while the church is grafted in Romans 11, Paul does not say the church replaces Israel entirely. He uses olive tree imagery where Gentiles are grafted into the tree, not that the original branches are broken off forever. He still expects branches, Israel, to be grafted back, Romans 11:23 through 26. Next claim, the land promises to Israel were fulfilled in a spiritual sense. The promised land becomes the new heavens and new earth. Wow, that's a stretch. But listen, while some spiritual fulfillment is valid, many texts speak of entirely earthly land, an earthly physical return, a restoration for Israel, that's Ezekiel 36 and Zechariah 12, etc. Substituting this as purely spiritual undermines the normal reading of the text. Next claim, Israel's rejection of Jesus means that the church inherits all of Israel's promises. Well, why does it mean that? Rejection does not mean automatic replacement. Again, Romans 11, 1 through 2. Paul says Israel is not rejected finally. There's a future restoration. The hardening in part remains until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. Next claim, covenants were conditional and thus can be revoked. Therefore, Israel's national role can end. Well, while some covenants have conditional elements, like the Deuteronomic covenant, the Abrahamic covenant is presented as everlasting and is tied to God's oath in Genesis 22. To say Israel's role ends is to challenge God's faithfulness. Next claim, the church language in the New Testament shows the church has replaced Israel. Well, the New Testament uses church, Greek ecclesia, for the assembly of believers, but New Testament authors still refer to Israel. They refer to the tribes, the promises to Abraham, etc. They do not simply eliminate Israel from God's plan. Two things can be true at the same time. Well, I hope this helps the next time someone tells you the physical promises to Israel are null and void and have been replaced in the church. Point them back to this curious book called the Bible. I'm Rob Singleton. I'll see you in the next video.